I always find it fascinating that regardless of what belief system someone happens to have, they will almost invariably wind up believing that there really are only two belief systems in the world, theirs and everybody else. Now, of course, in some ways that's true. There always your belief system and everybody else. But the problem with it is that all of that, there's your belief system, and all of that, should I say, winds up getting lumped into one thing. Probably every belief system is like that. I think here in the States, and probably Western society in general, we encounter that quite a bit with Christianity. And no matter what, there's Christians, and then there's everybody else. And there's God, and then there's everything else. I had some really interesting comments recently by a gentleman who seemed very sincere, very nice fellow, but very obviously a Christian who seemed, for whatever reason, depending, I guess, on the videos that he watched of mine, to think that I was atheist, and that he was trying to convince me into not being an atheist. Because if I didn't believe in his God, his way, I guess I was somehow an atheist. Which I found rather interesting, because I think to some extent we all fall into that type of thinking, whether we want to or not. A lot of it has to do with our upbringing, and I don't mean upbringing as in some belief system was forced down our throat or anything like that, but simply whatever we were brought up with, the rest of the world is just something else. I mean, when you think about it, there's those people who are Americans. They're just Americans. They're Americans. And the rest of the world is, well, it's the rest of the world. And there's no country greater than America. And because there's no country greater than America, all the other countries are somehow bad. You know, and I remember being raised with this odd psychology, not by my parents, but by society in general, that somehow other countries were scary. Other countries were like Nazi Germany or something. And only in America did we have all these freedoms, as if you couldn't go to France and have freedoms, you know? But whatever the case, this is a type of thinking that's really hard to get around. Because when you're brought up Christian, for instance, and whenever I bring up Christians, always keep in mind, I do not mean all Christians, because not all Christians are like this. But we do have a tendency, certainly I had a tendency, back when I was Christian, to have very little understanding of what was outside, and therefore, perhaps I was a slightly more enlightened Christian in thinking that there was Christianity, and then there were the atheists and the heathens, you know. But I remember when I first met my mother's fiance, one of my mother's men my mother dated and was later engaged to, who was Muslim, or Muslim, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And when he would talk to you about Allah, about God, he just called him God, he would talk in exactly the same way a Christian would. And for me, I think it may have been my first realization. Looking back, it's hard to imagine that I ever couldn't realize this, but it was really my first realization that people of other religions were exactly the way we were, that they believed in things exactly the way we did. I bring this up because this gentleman who was making all these comments seemed, it was difficult to tell exactly what he was trying to do in his comments, but it seemed that he was sort of trying to convince me of something, to convert me to something. And as I've often said, it's pretty much impossible to convert an Omnist, because whatever you're trying to make them believe, we probably already believe. Just probably in kind of a different way. But it seemed like he was trying to convince me that God existed. Which is funny, because I certainly do believe God exists. I just believe in a very, very, very big God. And so it was confusing, and I think for a lot of Omnists that kind of thinking becomes confusing, because we don't understand the, let's call it Pascal's wager thinking. And this gentleman was saying things like, well, you know, don't you want to just have the chance? I mean, if there's the possibility that there might be a God and you might go to heaven, isn't it better to have that and be wrong than not have it and be right, or however exactly that type of thinking is? And I think to a Christian that makes a lot of sense. And I totally understand that, because to Christians there is God, to some Christians there is God, and then there's either false gods, or there's the devil, or there's the atheist, the complete non-believer, whatever. It's just all of that. And the problem for someone, for instance, of another faith, when a Christian comes to a Hindu and says, well, wouldn't you rather believe in my God? I mean, if you didn't believe in my God, you won't go to heaven. And the Hindu says, well, actually, and it depends on the Hindu you talk to, because the Hindu religion is highly varied, but they have their own idea of what's going to happen after death. And they would say, well, I know what's going to happen after death. And I don't need your God, because I have my God. Now, to the Omnist, all of this is kind of silly, because we kind of feel like, well, there's one thing, whatever it is, and everyone is referring to it. Everyone's calling he, she, it something different. Everyone's using different labels. It can be particularly confusing. I think it may be part of the reason it took me so long to understand what this gentleman was even trying to say to me. But no matter what, I think all of us have that to some extent. All of us will have a tendency to fill things in, and it's just the way our brain works. There's almost no way around it. When your brain doesn't know something, it fills it in with whatever it can, even if what it's filling it in is kind of ridiculous. And so until you meet people, until you come to those realizations, there's no telling what you're going to think about anything you don't understand. Also, how do I put this? People will also interpret things in their own belief system. Like, let's say, for instance, a Christian said, well, what if you saw something incredible? What if God, or maybe not that precise, but what if you had a real sign? What if you had some real mystical experience? Would that prove to you God existed? And of course, the reason that seems true to a Christian is because there is either a God or there's not a God. There are no gradiences. There are no other possibilities. God doesn't come in any other shape and form. So, if you had a mystical experience, surely that would convince you that God existed. Unfortunately, to anyone of any other belief system, including Omnism, it can mean anything. To a pure rationalist, and thank goodness I am not a pure rationalist, but to a pure rationalist, regardless of what happened, regardless of what completely supernatural occurrence might happen around them or to them, if there was nothing else left, they could just decide it was an hallucination or some type of drug effect. Perhaps if it happened to themselves, maybe they could just decide that they had a psychotic break or something. No matter what, a rationalist can explain something in his own terms, by his own belief system. And if I was to have a supernatural event happen to me, some type of mystical experience, would that prove to me there was a God? Well, for one thing, I already believe that there's a God, but all that would do for me is prove to me that yes, something is out there. And the rationalist side of me might say, well, you know, it could be a hallucination, but it could very well just say, okay, there's something interesting out there. But it's not going to prove to me what it would prove to a Christian. To a Christian, every time something good happens to them, it was God. Anytime something bad happens to them, maybe it was the devil, maybe it was them, maybe it was their own sinful nature that caused it, depending on how that particular Christian mythologized that. So this is one of the things that I think is so important to Omnism, is simply understanding this type of translation. The reason that people feel and believe these things, and why when someone comes at you, well, for some people, of course, it angers them. For an Omnist, I think it maybe just confuses us. There is no way you are ever going to convince that type of a Christian that, yes, you believe in their God, you believe in Jesus, you just perhaps believe it in a different way. And if you don't give them the all or nothing, I believe this and only this and nothing else, you're not going to convince them. Don't try. Don't even try. It's, in my opinion, not the point of Omnism. I think we're good at being diplomats. I think we're good at being peacekeepers. I think we're good at translating things and helping people come together and understand. But just try not to get into arguments with people. And it happens to me. Heaven knows, if any of you read my comments, you'll find it's happened to me on occasion. I apologize for whenever that does happen. It's not my intent. To me, that is not the purpose of Omnism, but sometimes it happens anyway. Anytime it does, I apologize. For now, I'm the Urban Omnist. I'll see you guys on the next one.